I'm a veterinarian, sure, but I'm way more than that. I'm also a tango dancer, a struggling but determined pie maker, and a mom. With IndeVets, I get to choose when and where I work. I create my own schedule and choose shifts at nearby animal hospitals that are right for me. Having that flexibility is exactly what I need to have plenty of time for all those other things that I am. Because I'm more than just a vet. Visit IndeVets.com to learn more and apply.
Welcome back to the IndeVets Happy Hour. I am your host, as always, Dr. Andrew Heller, DVM. Unfortunately, Marissa Brunetti, VMD, is not here with me today. She is actually working in clinic and couldn't make it. We had already scheduled this with our fabulous guest who I'm about to introduce. But give me 1 second to just talk a little bit about what we've been doing. So today we're going to take a little bit of break from our new breed series to talk with a special guest about mushrooms. So I'm really, really excited to talk about this. We have Dr. Rob Silver here. He's a veterinarian, DVM, and he is from Colorado. I actually had a chance to meet you, Dr. Silver, in Texas when I was there at the Southwest Vet Symposium, and it was fun to see you and meet your co-worker, Joni, right? She was a wealth of information for me as well, and I was at your booth talking a lot with her. You and I are also on the DVM 360 advisory board together, and that was where I first saw you. It's great to have you on this podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. Well, I'll give you guys Dr. Silver's quick bio. He graduated, am I allowed to say the year? 1982.
Yeah, I'm an old fart.
You look a lot younger. For those who can't see this, obviously you're listening to this, he looks a lot younger than he is. 1982 grad from Colorado State Vet Med. And he was actually one of the first integrative vet clinics. He started one of the very first integrative vet clinics in the USA in Boulder, Colorado in 1993. Since then, he's become nationally recognized in veterinary herbal and nutraceutical medicines, medicinal mushrooms, veterinary CBD, and cannabis therapeutics. So we're definitely going to talk a little bit about those things. He's actually an adjunct faculty at Lincoln Memorial University, which is a college of veterinary medicine, and the Chi University College of Traditional Chinese Veterinary Medicine. There you go. He's written several books. His first book was Medicinal Marijuana and Your Pet back in 2014. And have you come out with your medicinal mushroom book yet?
No, it's a struggle, but okay. I'm working on it.
So it's called, what is it called?
Well, I'm actually blending. Since I published the first book in 2014, I've learned just a ton of more stuff. And, we've had a lot more clinical experience. It's gotten a lot more legal, all those things. So there's a lot of more information I wanted to add about cannabis. And then with this great amount of interest in mushrooms per our podcast today, I wanted to add information on mushrooms. So it would blend both. And then I'm doing like a health guide for several conditions that we see in our pets, and suggesting how one could incorporate CBD or mushrooms for those conditions.
Oh, that's great. And so what is the company you're now working with in the mushroom world?
I'm working with a Canadian company. They're called Real Mushrooms. And they've only been in existence 7 years, but their parent company, Namex, they're both in British Columbia, has been cultivating medicinal mushrooms for 20 years. And they're one of the global leaders in that segment. So it's really great to work with such a company because, they're not just making products. I mean, they're doing research. They're leaders in this whole field of medicinal mushroom cultivation. So it's great. And they've got funding for some studies, and I'm starting to get myself tooled up to do a couple of studies at veterinary colleges on mushrooms, safety first, and then later efficacy.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really excited to actually have you here. I am fascinated by mushrooms. I know I saw a movie recently on Netflix. You know what I'm talking about.
Fantastic fungi. It's really, it's really, I think, catalyzed a lot of interest in mushrooms with
for sure.
Public. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it just made me think, whoa, like there's just so much we still don't know about mushrooms, and there's a whole nother world out there underground,
Yes.
Quite literally. So let's talk a little bit about how you got interested in integrative veterinary medicine, just a little bit of your background into cannabis, and then how you got into mushrooms and your fascination with them as well.
Well, when I graduated CSU's vet school in 1982, I thought I knew everything. I was ready to do battle with all the diseases of the world. But after a couple of years in practice, there were some diseases that were just so frustrating to address, the chronic diseases primarily, cancer certainly, but diabetes and the organ diseases, organ failure, whatnot. And so I was looking for more tools to address these because I didn't think there were adequate tools in conventional medicine. And I'd had a lot of history myself of backpacking and doing survivalism and identifying plants that you could eat and plants that maybe you could use in a medicine kit in the wild. So that was kind of the first place I started, was learning about herbs and learning about diet as well. And so I started offering those as services and started to see remarkable improvements in some of these patients that I could not touch with conventional medicine. Now, some didn't improve, some just didn't do well, but I had enough improvement that was motivation for me to keep on going. And then I found that the pet consumers were also very interested in this. So it wasn't that bad as a practice builder as well. And you get to a point, I think, in veterinary medicine, and we see that a lot these days with the mental health issues that we're seeing in the veterinary profession, that you need to do something that comes from your heart, that comes from a place that is not just formulaic, but is something that's motivational, inspirational, and creative. And so for me, that's what integrative medicine presented. But it wasn't just finding alternate modalities, because I'm a nerd, I'm a science nerd, and I really love conventional medicine, and I love the diagnostic process and all the science and all the tools and techniques that we have. It's just they don't always do the job. So I mean, certainly diagnostically they do. So that's why I call myself integrative, because I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not going to stop doing conventional. In fact, I do conventional first, and then I see how I can temper or improve that with integrative therapies.
Yeah, you're a true scientist, right? You're using trial and error. You're doing experiments. You're seeing what works. You're not just reading textbooks and just regurgitating it back to the world and to your patients. You're actually looking into things that could be.
I'd like to think that's true. One of the definitions that when I teach an introductory course into integrative medicine, but one of the definitions that I teach about integrative medicine is that it's patient-centered, and the emphasis is on successful outcomes. So it doesn't matter what you use. You want to focus on the patient and the patient's story and the patient's condition, and you want to use whatever it's going to take to have a successful outcome.
That's great. So I'd love to find out a little bit about mushrooms. So I know there are mushrooms, and then there's mycelium, which is sort of part of the mushroom. Can you explain a little bit about that, what the differences might be before we get into the science behind it?
Yeah, I think it's important, really. This is Mushroom 101.
Yeah.
The mushroom has a life cycle, and we need to go back to freshman microbiology, way back when. But, it starts with the spores, and the spores are gametes. They're haploid. So you have to have two compatible spores that the spores germinate into hyphal tubes. The hyphal tubes then will merge if they're compatible, and then they form the mycelium. And the mycelium elaborates digestive enzymes and whatever its substrate is to digest and nourish itself so it can continue its vegetative growth. Once the mycelium reaches a point where either it exhausts the nutrients or environmental conditions drive it to go to need to reproduce, the mycelium then organizes itself into a mushroom, what we think of as the mushroom. And the mushroom is actually tightly compressed mycelium. And the mushroom is really the spore-bearing structure in the cycle. So as the mushroom comes up, the spores start being created on specialized structures within the mushroom that we use those specialized structures for identifying them and classifying them. And then when conditions are right, it drops those spores, which then germinate, and the cycle reproduces itself.
Yeah, so you're saying that the mushroom is sort of just the adult version of the mycelium.
Yes, I would call that, we would call the mycelium the vegetative stage. We call the mushroom the fruiting stage. Because you're right, it's like the fruit because it has the seeds or the spores inside of it, and we call the spores the reproductive phase. So it's a complex life cycle. They're evolutionary advanced within the fungal kingdom. They're kind of at the top of the heap there in terms of their complexity.
So where do we get the medicine from? Is it from the fruit, the mushroom, or is it from the mycelium?
You can get it from both. The mycelium is very powerful. I mean, some of the medicines we get from the mycelium, we use conventionally. That's where penicillin and streptomycin comes from. That's where cyclosporin comes from the mycelium. So the pharmaceutical industry has developed technology to cultivate the mycelium in a liquid culture where they can then amplify the growth of the mycelium for a given species of fungus, and then they can remove the liquid culture, take the massive mycelium, and do their pharmaceutical extraction process on it to get the drug or to get the supplement that we have within the mycelium. For instance, there's all these studies now, there's 2 studies now about the turkey tail mushroom mycelial extract called PSP and hemangiosarcoma. We certainly can discuss that if you can.
Yeah, that's great.
But so that comes from this same process of the liquid culture of the mycelium and then a pharmaceutical extraction of a single molecule, and that's patentable. So, it's the dream of pharma to have that. The mushroom itself, traditionally for hundreds of years, for centuries, if not millennia, is what has been used by people for food and also for medicine and also for spiritual activities.
Sure.
Depending on the species of mushroom.
Right.
And traditionally, the mushroom has been used medicinally. They dry the mushroom. Mushrooms are 90% water, so it's better to dry them. They preserve better. When they dry, you can keep them for years very easily. But when they're fresh, they don't keep so well. So they dry them, and then they found that the mushroom cell wall is the fungal cell wall in general is extremely strong and fibrous and difficult to break apart. So they have to subject the dried mushroom, and maybe the mycelium as well, to a hot water bath, 90 degrees centigrade for 2 or 3 hours, breaks down that fibrous cell wall, which releases the bioactive components in both the cytoplasm, but the cell wall itself also contains bioactive components.
So you're saying that the mushrooms have to be treated in order for you to get the proper optimal nutrition and medicinal qualities from them?
It's likely you would get a little if you were to eat it dry, or raw. But really, they do need to be processed first in order to optimize, the medicinal aspect of it. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize that. I don't think I ever knew that. That's really interesting. What about cooking them? Does that do the same thing?
Cooking is great. Yes, cooking is great, but you have to cook them enough. So we don't recommend that anyone eat raw mushrooms. And some raw mushrooms actually may have small amounts of toxic factors in them or anti-nutritional factors, kind of in the same way we have an antitrypsin that we find in legumes, for instance. So cooking is good. And, so eating them is good. They do have medicinal value. But for the best medicinal value, you want to do the appropriate type of hot water extraction. In some cases, we also use an alcohol extraction to get some of the more fat-soluble components out of it. And you want to concentrate that so you don't have to eat as much. I mean, you're going to have to eat, ounces and ounces of freshly cooked mushroom in order to get the same medicinal value. And you might not even get that kind of value because you're not doing, a thorough enough extraction process. So for medicinal purposes, I suggest using the extracted mushroom powder. For a healthy lifestyle, I think, eating cooked mushrooms is wonderful, along with brightly colored fruits and vegetables and the appropriate, nutrient profile and all those things, that might be appropriate for the individual, who's eating, whatever their needs might be.
So when I was at the trade show and I came by your booth, I saw you guys had a bunch of different species of mushrooms in capsule form. And so what are the top 3 or 4 mushrooms? Let's just go through them quickly and talk about what they might do for our pets. I'm sure if they work on our pets, they probably work on humans as well. likely.
Oh, yeah.
But since Real Mushrooms started out as a human company, right, and they expanded into the vet side. Okay, let's talk about from a pet perspective.
There are maybe 15 to 20 species of mushrooms that have been identified as having medicinal value. Real Mushrooms, the company that I'm working with, cultivates about 10 of those. So of those 10, there probably are 4 that I think would be most important to discuss today.
Great.
Okay. The first would be the turkey tail mushroom, also known as Trametes versicolor, formerly had been known as Coriolis versicolor. So it's found geographically all around the world, growing on dead and dying trees. It's kind of like bracket fungi you can see on when you go through the woods. You can see the fungi on it. You might even walk past it because it's everywhere. Yeah. And it has been in use in multiple cultures because of it has the highest beta glucan content of any mushroom. Also has very powerful triterpenoids, which are the fat-soluble components of the mushroom that also have immune modulating, but also have anti-neoplastic activity. So we think of turkey tail specifically for cancer or for viral diseases, but it can also do general immune modulation. The study in for hemangiosarcoma used the mycelial byproduct of the turkey tail mushroom. And the pilot study was pretty successful, but the follow-up study with 100 patients didn't show any advantage to the use of the PSP over the use of splenectomy and chemotherapy. So that's one mushroom. The next mushroom is what we call Ganoderma lucidum. It's known colloquially as Reishi, which is kind of the Japanese term for it. And Reishi is the mushroom of immortality. And it's one of the oldest and most prominent mushrooms out there. In ancient China, the Chinese would when they would find these beautiful specimens of the Ganoderma mushroom, the Reishi mushroom, they would bring it to the emperor as an offering because it would convey long life to the emperor. The number of active ingredients in Reishi is huge. It had a huge amount of research into it. It has beta glucans, but it also has these very bitter triterpenes that Real Mushrooms uses a dual extraction process. They do both the hot water extraction, but they also use an alcohol extraction to get these triterpenes out because they are historically so potent. And Reishi is used by Zen masters as a meditation aid, because not only does it have it has a pro-immune system properties because of the beta glucans, it also has calming properties, which is why it was used by Zen masters. It has many properties. These triterpenes even have an antihistaminic effect, which is pretty neat. So using something like a reishi for a mast cell tumor, because of the beta glucans that would benefit the immune system vigilance against the tumor, plus the antihistaminic properties, which would give it some systemic relief. So that's kind of what I'm looking in terms of developing these protocols that veterinarians will be able to, understand, rather than just say, use it for this, this, and this. I'm going to say, use it for this because it has this property, use it for this because it has that property. So that's what I'm trying to do.
So you've mentioned specific components of these mushrooms and what they have in them that tends to work, or at least what we know of works, right?
Yes.
Can we extract just those things and put those into a pill, right, and give them? Or does it have to be the whole mushroom in its entirety for these things to have their best benefit? Like how pharmaceutical companies will go out there, they'll find the one active component in something, and then they'll take that, extract it, and amplify it, and then put it into a pill form, right?
I think that's more likely to happen with the mycelial cultivation in liquid, because you can get a really purified culture. With the fruiting bodies, I don't think it's quite as easy to do that. Because you also get the reproductive aspect of it as well with the spores. So I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, though, because all the studies show, pharma notwithstanding, I know they love to have a single patented product with a single effect for a single disease. That's kind of, their gold standard. But the integrative approach looks at the entire organism, like the mushroom, let's say, that has multiple polypharmacy bioactive components that work together synergistically. So I think it's certainly possible to do what you're suggesting. I'm not sure you'd really want to, at least in the context of historically how we've looked at using mushrooms medicinally and what we know about the synergy amongst the ingredients in the mushroom.
I think I asked because I know how difficult it is to cultivate these mushrooms, right? And I know that as they become more and more popular, just producing enough for the demand is expensive and not easy. Could they extract some of the components and make it cheaper? Because I know it's not cheap.
Yeah, I don't know if by extracting the components they're going to make it cheaper. They might make it more
synthesize
concentrated.
them. Synthesize them.
Yeah, these are very complicated biological. I mean, it's like, can we synthesize DNA? The beta glucans organize themselves into a triple helix. So, I mean, these are complicated biological compounds. Maybe, I don't know. You ask good questions and I don't have good answers for them, perhaps. But let me give you an example. For instance, the turkey tail study they did was on the mycelial extract. Now, we hear a lot of anecdotal reports about turkey tail. Now, we know, anecdotal reports, a study of one, no placebo control, a lot of could be potential bias or at least wishful thinking in it. But we hear a lot of, but you have to start somewhere when you do the research, and you have to find out kind of what it's like in the field before you start honing it down into an objective study. So we hear a lot that the turkey tail mushroom itself is very effective in putting many cancers into remission. Right now, I've got a patient I'm working on that refused splenectomy and is on the turkey tail mushroom plus a few other things 6 months later. Now he's starting to run out the clock in terms of the statistics, and I can't get a follow-up ultrasound. If there's a radiologist in the Alexandria area that would love to do a little pro bono work, I would love to get a picture in there, because they're saying, why should we even do this? Because he's either going to die or live. Who cares what it is? Well, I care, but I can't afford I can't do that ultrasound. But anyway, so I'm saying this. So they found that the second study they did with this extract of the mycelium didn't work, didn't show any improvement. And my feeling is this is because it's a single extract of the mycelium, a single molecule, as compared to the synergy that you get with all of the molecules that are found in the turkey tail. For instance, the beta-glucan, it's not just one. Beta-glucans are polymers of monosaccharides, and classically they're polymers of glucose, but it could be glucose and galactose, it could be glucose and fructose, and the more different types of heteroglucans you have like that, and the more cross branchings, the more bioactive it is as an immune modulator. So that's why, and then turkey tail has maybe eight of these different types of beta glucans. So the impact on the immune system is so much more huge than just a single beta glucan. So that's why I think your question was good. I question whether that's really a place we want to go when it comes to mushroom therapy.
Well, so what you're saying is it sounds like you want the whole. You don't want little bits of it and synthesized forms of it.
Yeah, well, that generally has been the approach, not just with mushrooms, but with herbs in general, and with cannabis as well. There's a form of CBD called an isolate that's a pharmaceutically pure CBD, very inexpensive. If you've got a horse, probably that's where you're going to go. If you've got a painful horse that you got to give a high dosage for a long period of time, you might go with isolate. But the studies show that you can, if you use the whole cannabis plant instead of just the one isolate, you can use a much substantially lower dosage, and you have a lower risk of side effects, and you potentially can get better efficacy. So, and that kind of parallels any herb or any medicinal, living being, that you want to use as much of it as you can because there's a natural synergy to it.
Okay, so back to your, I guess, 4 examples, right? So we've got turkey tail, we've got reishi, and I understand, turkey tail sounds like is great for anti-neoplastic properties. Reishi is great for calming effects. And then what's their third one?
Third one would be lion's mane. And now, lion's mane is the most popular mushroom in the United States because not only does it have the beta-glucans for the immune modulating properties, but they've discovered triterpenes in the mushroom and diterpenes in the mycelium, which have a direct effect on our nervous system. In fact, they can stimulate nerve growth factor or brain-derived nerve growth factor under the appropriate situation. I know we now have the Solensia, which is a nerve growth factor receptor blocker, so to speak. But we're talking about it. It's kind of a different function of nerve growth factor in that regards. But we find that lion's mane it reduces stress, it improves cognition, improves memory, and has an anti-dementia effect as well. The perfect mushroom for America today.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everybody's looking for that fountain of youth, certainly when it comes to the brain health.
And for our pets, with this, with the amount of senile, geriatric senility, CCD, those types of syndromes that we see, we're getting a lot of anecdotal information from pet parents that they're seeing benefits that way. Love to get a study going, and that will happen just, one thing at a time. So that's lion's mane.
What studies have been done to show proper dosing and things like that?
There are no studies in pets, period.
Wow. Okay. Got that out of the way.
There's 5 studies in pets that have been published, okay? Using mushroom extracts for a variety of things, for vaccine competence, and for cancer have been the primary functions of it. From those studies, I've been able to reverse engineer dosages, and I've looked at other studies as well in other species with beta-glucans in order to develop a dosing algorithm for mushrooms for our pets, because we need to know. I mean, to me, it's the difference between success and failure is not the choice of the supplement, although certainly to some extent, it's the dosage.
Yeah, absolutely.
People seem kind of clueless about dosages when it comes to supplements. They just figure, give them something, or they're dependent upon the company that labeled their bottle, which is always going to label those dosages lower, so the consumer thinks they don't have to spend as much when they buy that bottle. It's kind of an industry thing, and also lower doses are less likely to cause liability. So, so going by the label isn't really as accurate as going by the studies. So the algorithm I've created, I've been able to verify it by going to other studies and then reverse engineering where I just need someone to tell me how much beta-glucans they were giving and what the weight was of the subjects in order to do a mg per kg. So I've developed 3 tiers of dosing based on the weight of the animal, based on a mg per kg, because if you have a mild condition or you just want to do wellness or daily wellness, then you want to use a pretty low dosage on a daily basis. And so that kind of dosing is what I put on the labels of these products, because you can't really make medical claims. Or not really medical products per se. That's kind of the issue around nutraceuticals versus FDA approved drugs. You can't really make medical claims, but we kind of do. I mean, it's sort of a gray area there. So if you have more of a moderate type of condition, like let's say you want to use the lion's mane for calming or the reishi for calming, then we go a little higher. So the lowest dosage is about 2.5 mg per kg per day. The moderate dosage is maybe about 5 mg per kg. Then you want to get to a more severe problem like cancer or viral disease, you might want to go much higher. So that's where you go at 10 mg per kg, and I've seen some studies they've gone as high as 30 mg per kg per day of the beta-glucan content for treating a condition. So that's my algorithm, and it seems to work.
Yeah, and do you have numbers on toxic doses or lethal doses?
I do and I don't. That's going to be the first study that I do, is a toxicity study where we're going to do kind of the high end of my dosing tier first, panel them and look for changes before and after, feed them that for about a month or at least 2 weeks to give them enough time to have some response, and then give a dosage about 10 times the highest dosage, and then look again to see if there's any changes. Now, in all the other studies that have been done in other species, not veterinary, very, very safe. Turkey tail, for instance, they've got studies in humans they can share, and in mice, they can show doses even more than 10 times the normal dosages. No evidence of any aberration in any blood work or appetite or digestive function. So veterinarians, when you say mushrooms to a veterinarian, the first thing they're going to think is toxic, because that's what they see. The dog goes out in the backyard after rain, they've got some poisonous mushrooms, it chomps on them, gets sick, goes in to see the vet,
Yeah.
So I need to change that mindset for the vet, that mushrooms don't necessarily have to be toxic.
Well, the other thing is, contraindications when pets are on other medications, how the mushrooms may interfere or interact with other medications that pet is on. I think we're going to need a lot of studies on those things as well. So it sounds like we're just scratching the surface here, talking about potential with using mushrooms as medicine.
Well, we are. And I mean, in our pets, the medical mushroom knowledge base is huge in humans and laboratory animals. There's a large, we didn't have the prohibition to research with mushrooms that we've had with cannabis because of the stigma on THC. So there is a lot of research out there that's credible, well done. Many of it here in the U.S., but a lot of it in cultures where mushrooms are more important, like Asian cultures and Eastern European cultures. But it's becoming much more prominent, a research topic here in the U.S. as well.
So for vets that are interested in getting into this type of thing, where would you suggest they start? And, I know you work for a company called Real Mushrooms. If they're planning on stocking any of these things, how should they know, in terms of quality, what to look for?
Good point. Well, the way that the mushroom's cultivated is an important consideration regarding its quality, because the mushrooms from Real Mushrooms, they are actual mushrooms. They're being grown on their natural substrate, like the reishi mushrooms grow on stumps, in these large greenhouses outdoors that are temperature and humidity controlled.
Yeah.
That produces the most potent mushroom from that. But here in the US, because those are being cultivated in China, under USDA organic standards, they're all third-party tested for contaminants, and they're very clean. But the labor costs are lower there, so because they take a lot of tending. Well, it can take 6 months from the time you plant them to when you harvest them, which can make them quite costly here in the U.S. So in the U.S., what they're doing is they're growing the mycelium on grain and then not allowing them to grow into mushrooms. When you normally cultivate mushrooms, you start by growing the mycelium on grain, and you take that myceliated grain and you put that on the natural substrate. Mm-hmm. These companies are taking that myceliated grain and drying it and selling it as mushroom or as mycelial biomass. Hopefully they're saying mycelial biomass, which is the appropriate language to use. And they're claiming it has equivalent medicinal properties to the whole mushrooms. The studies we've done that measure beta-glucans for the mycelium on grain versus the whole mushroom show a substantial difference, as much as 10 times difference in the beta-glucan content. Plus, the myceliated grain is 50% grain carbohydrates. So many of our patients are on grain-free diets. Of course, that's a whole other topic.
Yes.
Or avoiding grain for this reason or that reason, or trying to avoid carbohydrates because, whatever. So those are the two types of products that are in the marketplace. And Real Mushrooms offers the whole mushroom extract, whereas many other companies do not. So that's the first thing that I think a veterinarian needs to do, because we want to dose based on the activity of the bioactive compounds, on the beta-glucans primarily. If it's a lower beta-glucan content, then you might have to use more. You might not get the same results as with that.
Now, just to be clear, mushrooms are still categorized as a supplement, right? So they're not subject to FDA approval at this point.
Well, FDA reserves the right to have oversight of anything that's being sold to the public, as food or medicine, and now as supplements as well. The FDA is very binary. It's either food, or it's drug. Nutraceuticals, or supplements are theoretically neither food nor drugs, so they're kind of in that gray zone. So it's a challenging area for regulation, but it is being addressed by an organization called the National Animal Supplement Council that works with the FDA CVM to establish guidelines for products. But nonetheless, if you make medical claims, the FDA is going to issue a stop sale. They don't like medical claims on products. You can't say, our turkey tail is so strong, it's going to knock that hemangiosarcoma out. You can't say that. That's a medical claim. We can say, it has, multiple beta-glucans, which have shown historically in other studies to be effective against, experimentally induced neoplasia.
Right.
You have to watch what you say, that way. But the other point is that mushrooms are not approved by the Center for Veterinary Medicine or by APCO as approved feed ingredients for animals.
Okay.
Same as hemp is not approved as a feed ingredient for animals. So you can't have them in products that are labeled as food because they are not considered to be food, will be considered adulterated feed by the FDA. So you have to use label language when you're describing mushrooms that describes them in terms of what their function is or what their contribution is to the function or structure of an animal or a person, and maybe how that may influence health. So that is the constraints that we have in terms of the regulation, in terms of how we label the mushrooms. Now, not all companies follow those constraints. Some will make pretty wild and medicinal claims for things. Many don't know that, and the FDA has been so busy with other things that they're not doing as much enforcement as they should to keep the marketplace a little more cautious about their claims.
Yeah.
So that's that answer.
Well, before we get to the fourth and final mushroom that I know you want to talk about, just on the same topic, if our listeners want to start to incorporate some of these practices into their own practice, I should say, where should they start?
Well, I guess starting with some education. Is probably the best place. And as you and I are both on the DVM 360 editorial board or scientific advisory board, I'm not sure what the exact name of it is. I have done there's a webinar now on medicinal mushrooms that is on their CE listing of webinars, so people can get a 1 CE credit for watching it, and they can learn a lot from that. The company Real Mushrooms, I would encourage veterinarians who are interested in learning more about mushrooms to sign up for a practitioner's account, and then we start sending a lot of educational materials. For instance, next week, every month we have both a pet Q&A, which is a Facebook Live pretty much for the pet consumer, where I just real-time answer questions about mushrooms and diseases and try not to make medical claims and trying to give medical advice, but nevertheless try to be helpful. We also have a monthly roundtable where we have practitioners come, a live Zoom with a practitioner who's used mushrooms, both human practitioners and veterinary practitioners. We alternate the months that way because they have a naturopathic physician who handles the human side, just like now I'm their chief veterinary officer, handles the vet side. And they discuss their use of mushrooms. We also have white papers that we publish, things that I'm writing, videos, a lot of material. I've got quite a bit of lecture notes available as well to the veterinarian. So we want to make sure that the veterinarian is well educated to help inform their use versus trying to tell them what to use this for. I mean, I can do that, but I really think it's a matter of your individual practice style to decide how and where you would want to use a given mushroom for a given condition.
Great. All right, so let's get back into your fourth and final most favorite mushroom.
It's called Cordyceps. And Cordyceps is an interesting mushroom. It's related to morels, and truffles in terms of the family of fungi that it comes from. And in the wild, the Cordyceps grows naturally in caterpillars. Or it can also infect ants and other insects. So Cordyceps, this whole category of mushroom, when the spores are disseminated in the wind and they land on an insect, they will infect that insect. They can go through the exoskeleton, and the mycelium grows inside the body of the insect and ultimately kills it. In the ant, apparently it takes over their brain and makes the ant crawl up to the top of a bush where it chomps onto a leaf at the very top just before it dies, and then it releases the spores in the best way to disseminate. It's amazing how intelligent things that so seemingly don't have a brain can be, like fungi. But so the same thing happens with the caterpillar. And the caterpillars are harvested. It's only found on the high steppes of Nepal and Bhutan, in that area, Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan. In the wild, the mushroom extract is worth $15,000 a kilo because it's reputed to have aphrodisiacal property.
Oh, all right.
The reality is it actually does. It has an effect on on improving and increasing your testosterone levels. It also has an effect on increasing your ATP levels in a way that is functional. So it's used by many athletes for performance. But it also has all those beta glucans in it. It supports the kidney and the liver. Certain mushrooms, certain plants seem to have an affinity for certain organs where they do their best work. So cordyceps is really good for the kidneys, really good for the lungs. Think asthma. In Chinese medicine, we see asthma as being an imbalance between kidneys and lungs. Think horses. Horses are all lungs and legs and performance. Cordyceps would be great for those. Think cats, with their genetic tendency to have kidney disease, it can help to support the kidney through that process.
Have they discovered the components of cordyceps that has these effects?
They have. One last virtue of cordyceps.
Okay.
Because it comes from very edible mushrooms like morels and truffles, it's also quite tasty. I think that it tastes a little bit like toast. So that also makes it very applicable for our feline friends who ultimately the challenge with them is getting it into them, not so much whether it works or not.
Well, and if you said it's good for kidneys, you got me on that for cats, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's definitely something like that. And, I definitely have, because one of the things I'll be doing with this company is formulating condition-specific products that veterinarians can, not have to understand more about mushrooms other than, that silver formulated it and it's good for this organ system or this problem or whatever, even though I won't make medical claims that it is. We have to be careful about how we use that language. So yeah, I love cordyceps and I take it daily and I feel it really helps to benefit my energy levels as I am aging at this point in time, in spite of how I look.
So because you said it's at 15,000 per kilo, has Real Mushrooms come up with a way of producing it at cheaper rates? Because that sounds a little bit out of budget for many.
They grow it on rice. So it's only 250 a kilo.
Okay.
So, and you don't need a kilo at a time, you probably need, maybe
milligrams worth. Yeah.
Maybe a gram or something of extract or so, if you're a human. So yeah, it's quite cost effective. And so those four are really the top four mushrooms. There are more and they're very interesting mushrooms. We've got oyster mushrooms and of course shiitake. Those are two very tasty mushrooms. Maitake, another very tasty mushroom, very powerful beta glucan content. A study in Eastern Europe using oyster mushroom extracts in shelter dogs with repressed immune systems from all the stress, loss of their immune competence when they're being vaccinated. The shelter for rabies were unable to mount any kind of protective titers. They had one group they preconditioned with mushrooms, and they were able to all get protective titers. So these days, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy amongst there always has been vaccine hesitancy amongst the veterinary clients, certainly, but in general. And so more of us are doing vaccine titers. So we don't have to vaccinate unless we think that their protection isn't there, if there's, environmental risks. So something like, using a mushroom, any mushroom that has beta glucans is going to do the same thing as this oyster mushroom extract. That would be a solution. What do you do when you get a non-protective titer from vaccinations? Maybe you booster again, but maybe their immune system's not competent. So precondition first and then booster, and then you're more guaranteed to get a protective response to that vaccination.
That's really interesting. Well, I think you've given the listeners and me a lot to think about with certainly those top four mushrooms. And I find the whole thing fascinating. I'd love to be able to incorporate it into, medical advice and part of my practice. So thank you so much for coming on and discussing this. I know your time is precious. And I'm sure we could talk about a lot of other things too. I know you and I chatted a little bit in Texas about some other things you're working on at home, which sound cool as well, but we won't get too far into that.
Yeah, this has been great, Andrew. You've really asked me, I think, the appropriate questions, and it's been good. And I'm looking forward to seeing, how this turns out, because it's the sort of thing I would probably refer people to listen to if they want to get, a quick understanding of mushrooms in 30 minutes or less.
This was really great. Thank you so much again. We hope you enjoyed this episode on the IndeVets Happy Hour. Thank you so much for listening. Tell your friends, vet techs, vets, general public, And if you like us, leave us a 5-star review and make sure to subscribe so you can be alerted whenever we have a new episode. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at clinical@indevets.com. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye.